against the United States if they can get their hands on them.
And meaning
we've
anything?
Seen anything. And we've seen that Osama bin Laden has consistently tried to buy, steal, acquire chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons and components. And it is, alas, I fear, just a question of time unless those networks are disrupted. And that's pretty much what we talk about in this book.
Is there any fear, Judith, of fixating on bin Laden alone?
Well, I have urged people not to do that because the problem is not one man. He is surrounded by some Egyptian militants who are extraordinarily professional, bloody-minded, and equally capable of taking over the organization if something happens to him. So the problem is really not only getting rid of bin Laden and the clique around him and the hundreds of members of his organization, which is called Al-Qaeda, or the base, but also uprooting the networks, the affiliated groups, the sleeper agents that he's planted throughout America, Europe, the Middle East. This is a monumental undertaking.
My brother called me very nervous with a good question. Follow the money. Who's paying for all this? Where's it coming from?
Well, one of the advantages of biological weapons is that they are a lot cheaper than nuclear weapons. And in fact, the kind of terrorism that Mr. bin Laden specializes in does not cost a great deal of money.
Didn't cost a lot to do what happened last Tuesday?
It did not. It is not the same as trying to build a nuclear weapon or spend millions of dollars buying components or stealing radioactive material. This is something that we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, and bin Laden comes from one of the wealthiest families. Even though they've disowned him, he has his own personal fortune, which he has poured into this movement, and his agents and his networks know that they, too, have to fend for themselves. As we've seen in previous bin Laden operations, many of these guys are out there kind of robbing delis and stealing cell phones to raise money for their operations. Now, in this case, there was money for flight schools, but still you're not talking about the kind of money that's easy to trace. They
didn't have to build
a
They didn't have to build a 767.
Exactly, or even pay the fuel bill.
Right. What can you tell us about bin Laden that obviously we don't know, we're just learning about him? You've been watching him a long time. What would surprise us the most about him?
What's the surprise? I think, to me, there are almost no more surprises in the man except his absolute determination to do what he says he's going to do. I think a lot of people just dismissed him, you know, this kind of wacky Saudi financier of terror, and they said, what can he do sitting in Afghanistan? And I guess what is amazing is the strength of those networks that he manages to control indirectly from Afghanistan. Now, Afghanistan is a very remote place, as Americans will soon discover. And the idea that he can maneuver in this fashion from a place without telephones, without good communications, it's very impressive that he is able to function at all.
We're going to take a call for you and then bring in some other members of our panel, but you said Americans will soon discover. You think that America is going to Afghanistan?
Well, I think America is certainly preparing itself to act against Afghanistan should it not turn Mr. bin Laden and his associates over to the government. I mean, I think that part of what we're seeing is an effort to persuade the Taliban that if they don't change their minds, they will pay a terrible price. Now, this message, by the way, Larry, has been delivered to them before. After the embassy bombings in Africa in 1998, after the Cole, the Taliban were told, you must turn him over. The UN General Assembly passed a resolution cutting off weapons to him, saying no nation shall supply Afghanistan. This was routinely disregarded. And so this is going to be a terrible challenge.
Indianapolis, call for Judith Miller. Hello.
Hello, good evening. What I'm wondering is, what can Americans do to ready ourselves for germ warfare? Is there anything? I have two questions. That's the first one.
Well, that's a hugely important and very good question. In fact, there is a lot we can do, which is another reason that my colleagues and I from the Times wanted to write this book. But most of it is not sexy. It's not the kind of stuff that this administration has been talking about. It's not national missile defense. It's not building hardware. The most important thing that we can do is invest in public health to make sure that every doctor, nurse, and pharmacist in this country understands what a case of anthrax or, heaven forbid, smallpox looks like. Right now, these networks in our country have been really ignored or underfunded. And people don't like to spend money in these quiet ways, but it's one of the most important things we can do.
It's a very important book, Germs, Biological Weapons, and America's Secret War. Very timely. Let's bring in David Firestone. He's in West Palm Beach, national correspondent for the New York Times, reporting on tactics of the 19 men believed to be the hijackers. Had a superb piece today. And Michael Isikoff, he's in Washington along with Judith Miller, investigative correspondent of Newsweek. We've had him on frequently. He reports the FBI is linking Tuesday's attacks to the October 2000 attack on the USS Cole, and that'll be in the edition of Newsweek coming out Monday. And by the way, gentlemen, and Judith, and we'll start with you, David, they have officially, the administration, given a name to this saga. It is Operation Noble Eagle. Operation Noble Eagle is now the name of this effort. David, you want to respond to that? Think it's a good idea?
Well, I'm not really qualified to judge the administration's response, but we have spent the last few days knocking on doors around Florida and trying to figure out who these guys were. And we've come up with some rather remarkable details of what they... One of the things we found from an FBI document, for example, was the way they used the conveniences that modern business travelers use, such as online travel agencies like Travelocity. They used their frequent flyer numbers to book these flights in some cases. They used storefronts like mailboxes, etc., which so many Americans use as essentially a mail drop. These were extremely well planned, but even more than well planned, they understood how the society works and how they could use it for their own anonymity and for their own purposes.
Meaning they'd studied it a long time.
Absolutely.
Michael Isikoff, your report coming out, and we've got an advance of it here, almost definitely links part of this group of hijackers, especially those at the Pentagon, to the Cole, right?
Well, we do know that the FBI and the CIA had knowledge of at least two of the suspected hijackers, and in fact, the Bureau had an active investigation going, looking for those two individuals right up until Tuesday's bombing. Just at the end of last month, in late August, the CIA notified first the INS and the FBI that these two individuals, one of whom was Khalid Al-Mihdhar, had been captured on a surveillance videotape in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, meeting with one of the suspected leaders of the group that bombed the USS Cole last October and killed 12 sailors. And of course, it was law enforcement had already tied the Cole bombing to the bin Laden organization. So they had an association of this guy, Al-Mihdhar, with a top associate of bin Laden. They notify the INS about this guy in late August and asked that he be put on a terrorist watch list to keep him out of the country. And the INS discovers that he's already in the country and had come in this year with another individual. And so that is passed along to the Bureau. The FBI begins an active investigation looking for them. The problem is they didn't have much to go on. The only information they had about where they might be was the address they listed with immigration authorities, and it was Marriott Hotel, New York. Which doesn't tell you a whole lot. Yeah, well, that's right. It's got at least 10 hotels. The Bureau methodically went down checking every hotel record, every record of everybody who checked into the Marriott Hotel in New York this year, and came up with no matches. They also started looking in Southern California because they discovered that these two guys had also come into the country last year under a business visa. Again, no matches.
David and Judith, this for both of you. David, is this a breakdown here, or is this something that no one could have found?
Well, I'm not sure what the security agencies are capable of doing in terms of listening to phone calls, but I think it would be almost impossible for them to monitor the kinds of internet traffic, for instance, that these guys used, because they were so mundane, in a sense. A couple of these guys, for instance, went into Kinko's to use the internet. You know, in a sense, it's a method of hiding in plain sight that's enormously effective by blending in singles apartments, for example, around Florida, and by using the same methods that all of us use to communicate and to get around. They were able to disguise their behavior even from people who saw them every day.
Judith, are they that bright?
Well, it would be a mistake to underestimate them, Larry, but I would say this also about their names. Arabic names often have 3 and 4 parts. It's rarely just 2 names, and they're spelled differently. And someone's name can be on an INS watch list, and he can change a letter or 2 or take out his middle name, and INS will not find him. This is really hard work, and INS, I think, in previous hearings we've learned that one of the great shortages in American intelligence is people who know how to speak the languages of the people that we're watching.
Actually, Larry,
and I think that continues to be a problem.
We're also reporting tonight that along these lines that the U.S. military has some indication that at least some of the names of the suspected hijackers match names of people who had been trained at the Naval Air Station in Pensacola, where the U.S. military trains foreign pilots. Now, they don't know that it's the same, that these hijackers were actually trained by the U.S. military, which I think would be quite a horrific irony if it turns out to be true, or if they took the names of people who had been trained by the U.S. military. But that does underscore the difficulty that Judy's talking about. David, you think action's imminent?
Well,
retaliatory action.
It certainly sounds like they're trying to prepare the nation for a protracted struggle here. Although I don't know if you can do it just with radio addresses. Clearly they're going to have to lay out either while it's happening or ahead of time exactly what we're in for. I'm not sure people really understand the length and the degree of difficulty that lies ahead.
Thank you all very much. Judith Miller, we'll be calling on all of you again. Senior writer, New York Times, her book, Germs, Biological Weapons, and America's Secret War. David Firestone, national correspondent for the New York Times. And Michael Isikoff of Newsweek, and his piece will run on the Monday edition comes out in many areas Sunday night. Judith Miller, David Firestone, Michael Isikoff, we thank you very much. We'll meet our next panel. Here's, though, a shot of New York City right now. Smoke still coming through. And the rescue operations continue. No bodies were found today as of when we went on the air. No survivors. No, I don't think any bodies were found either. In Washington, D.C. is Colonel Bill Taylor, United States Army retired, combat veteran, and expert on national security issues, including terrorism. Nice seeing Bill again. In Washington also is James Woolsey, the former director of the CIA, and here in Los Angeles, our own terrorism expert, Brian Jenkins, been with us frequently, consultant to governments and the private sector, a senior advisor to the president of the RAND Corporation. Colonel Taylor, how much of a breakdown in security was this?
I think the breakdown mainly was in our intelligence. Whatever we do, whatever options we go after, intelligence with a big I is number one. You don't organize military forces to go operate somewhere unless you know what the target is, where it is, how it moves. All that is intelligence. That'll tell you how to configure your forces, how to do your capability analysis, how to develop your capability, your contingency plans.
Does that mean, James Woolsey, that your former agency failed?
Well, it means American intelligence overseas certainly needs some improvement in being able to pick up indicators of people coming to this country. But some of these people in the New York Times this morning have been here for 8 years. Anything that happens in this country is, of course, the responsibility of local law enforcement or the FBI. So